Since Hamas was democratically elected in 2005... What?
Let's reword that.
Well, how do you want to say it?
Let's start from 2007.
Okay.
Now begin. Since Hamas captured Gaza. Captured in 2007.
But how did they do that?
They took it.
From who?
From a rival Palestinian group.
But how could they capture it if they were elected?
A year after they were elected, Hamas captured the government from a rival Palestinian group. Say it.
But you're referring to the US-backed coup of the Hamas government.
Just write what I say.
Of course, of course.
Israel has never tried to oust Hamas. Just say it.
Yes, sir.
Look at the New York Times framing of this conflict. Look at how the New York Times manufactures consent. It is called the Israel-Hamas War. And yet even the Israeli government isn't hiding the fact that it is committing a full-on genocide against Palestine itself. This is not an Israel-Hamas war. This is the Israeli genocide of Palestine. And shame on the New York Times for not doing its job. The UN says Israel-Gaza war. The Israel-Gaza war is deadliest ever for its personnel. Israel-Gaza war? Really? I thought it was the Israel-Hamas war. New York Times, what's happening? Now it's the Israel-Gaza war? Yes, the famous Israeli army versus the Gazan army. Oh wait, Gaza doesn't have an army. Gaza doesn't have an air force. Gaza doesn't have a navy. Oh right, Gaza can't wage war. Oh that's right, Gaza's only line of defense are civilians who have been radicalized by Israel's brutality and have decided to form an underground militant opposition resistance group engaging in armed resistance against the security forces of Israel for the Palestinian struggle to self-determine. Remember when President Biden was asked about the death toll that Gaza's health ministry was reporting? And he said, no, that can't be right. Last month, President Biden cast doubt on death toll numbers coming from the health ministry without offering an explanation. Yeah, no shit. However, its statistics were considered credible enough for the US State Department to cite them in a report released this year that covered previous conflicts. On Monday, the head of the United Nations again urged an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, painting a dire picture. Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children, Secretary General Antonio Guterres told reporters. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day, Mr. Guterres said. More United Nations workers have been killed than in every comparable period in the history of our organization. Hold up, I remember this one. Back in 2014, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon publicly deplored Israel's Operation Protective Edge, in which it bombed UN schools and killed a bunch of UN workers. It's almost as if this has been going on for decades. Wow. Can you imagine a country just being in such flagrant violation of international law that they bomb United Nations offices, kill United Nations Relief and Works Agency workers, kill World Health Organization workers, kill humanitarian activists, and yet we all hold our nose and look the other way? According to the New York Times, we are supposed to feel sorry for war criminals. Pictured here is Gadi Eisenkot, a former military chief of staff who recently lost a son fighting as an Israeli soldier in the illegal occupation and operation in the Gaza Strip. Hey, General Eisenkot, I have a message for you. If you don't want to incur violent reprisals against your family and your country, don't do and say things like this. We will wield disproportionate power against every village from which shots are fired on Israel and cause immense damage and destruction. This isn't a suggestion, this is a plan that has already been authorized. Head of the IDF Northern Command, Gadi Eisenkot. This is a public acknowledgement of a formal policy of the Israeli military that constitutes a known war crime. It is absolutely appalling to me that the New York Times writes an article about General Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot and does not mention the doctrine that he formulated and formalized into Israeli policy, the Dahaya Doctrine. Why does the New York Times not mention the Dahaya Doctrine? I feel like this is a perfect example, one of many, in which the New York Times clearly portrays its own bias in its reporting. The New York Times, just like the Washington Post and other media institutions, are only concerned with their constituents that pay them. The narrative that gets promoted is the one that serves power. In this case, it is Israel and the United States. Do not look to the New York Times to find truth. The omission of information that is relevant to the context of the situation and the geopolitical event is noticeably missing. And for all you haters out there that want to say,
"But why did he use a Wikipedia article?"
Gadi Eisenkot and the Dahaya Doctrine is literally mentioned in every book that I've read about Palestine. In an interview with 60 Minutes, which aired tonight, President Joe Biden said that he was convinced that the Israelis are going to do everything in their power to avoid the killing of innocent civilians. Yet just days ago, we learned that Israeli President Isaac Herzog publicly admitted that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, basically admitting that the official strategic policy of the Israeli Defense Forces was to indiscriminately kill every Gazan civilian. In addition to sending the USS Gerald Ford, which is like the most advanced aircraft carrier the United States has, parking it outside of Gaza in the Mediterranean, we just now sent another aircraft carrier, the Dwight D. Eisenhower, which our own Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin admits is to deter hostile actions against Israel. The message is clear. Everyone hold their nose and look away while Palestinians get wiped off the map. Look at the New York Times framing of this conflict. Look at how the New York Times manufactures consent. It is called the Israel-Hamas war. And yet even the Israeli government isn't hiding the fact that it is committing a full-on genocide against Palestine itself. This is not an Israel-Hamas war. This is the Israeli genocide of Palestine. And shame on the New York Times for not doing its job. Yesterday we learned that Israel in fact knew about Hamas's plan to attack for over a year before it happened. They knew the extent, they knew the scope, they knew the scale, they knew the strategy, they knew the tactics, and they knew the targets, but still decided to turn a blind eye. This is according to the New York Times. The Israeli government intercepted a 40-page document, in fact, that they codenamed Jericho Wall. Jericho Wall outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. Israeli officials privately concede that had the military taken these warnings seriously and redirected significant reinforcements to the south where Hamas attacked, Israel could have blunted the attacks or possibly even prevented them. Earlier this year, in July, just 3 months before the attacks, a veteran analyst with Unit 8200, which is Israel's signal intelligence agency, warned that Hamas had conducted an intense day-long training exercise that appeared similar to what was outlined in the blueprint. Israeli security officials have already acknowledged that they failed to protect the country, and the government is expected to assemble a commission to study the events leading up to the attacks. Remember, in 1973, Golda Meir was ousted from her position as prime minister because she failed to intercept and prevent the preemptive strike from Egypt and Syria against Israel. All of this spells the end of the political career of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he knows it. That is why he is bloodthirsty right now, looking to extend this war into the foreseeable future, because he knows once the dust settles, he is out. The building where those hostages were being held were not a target. So why did you strike the building? It was not struck by our forces. The airstrike that you called in destroyed the building and killed your own hostages. We did not know their real-time location. You have the most state-of-the-art surveillance equipment and technology surveilling the most heavily surveilled places on Earth. How could you not know where they were? We do not strike places where we know there are hostages. But that's just what you did. In hindsight, we know we struck targets that were near the location where said hostages were being held. Right, so you did know. Hindsightedly, looking back, it was an oops, our bad dog, we'll try again and do better next time type of situation. Well, I don't think that's going to hold up in court. You dropped 2,000-pound bombs in densely populated civilian areas, generating a fireball of 8,500 degrees, burrowing a crater into the earth 11 meters deep and 50 meters wide, spewing concrete, rock, and dirt hundreds of yards away, leveling and destroying many buildings within the blast wave, which can be felt a half a mile away. And then you want to claim that you are being precise and discriminate in your targeting. Yeah, ain't that something? Next question, please. This is gross. To have a New York Times headline about the Gaza genocide be anything but the 27,000 innocent civilians that have lost their lives in the Gaza Strip in the past 112 some odd days is disgusting. The New York Times, which might as well be called the Israeli Times, is giving us headlines about possible UN workers who are accused of aiding Hamas. Israeli officials have presented evidence. They say ties workers at a Palestinian aid agency in Gaza to violence during the Hamas-led attack on Israel. How desperate is the Israeli state for some news, some investigations which favor their narrative, such as that the UN is a Hamas-led terrorist organization, staffed by terrorists themselves. I mean, this is a complete joke, which the New York Times is complicit. They are complicit in astroturfing the genocide that's happening in Gaza by only spouting Israeli lies and only showing the Israeli narrative. There's something like 30,000 innocent civilians that have been killed in the Gaza Strip in the past 100 some odd days. And yet this article, which gets the front page of the New York Times, wants to spotlight 12 UN relief and works agency workers who may have played a role, according to the Israeli government, in the attacks against Israel on October 7th, led by Hamas. Of course, the New York Times needs not question any other source but the Israeli government. All they need to do is say that Israel claims this, and that somehow must mean that it is sanctified, true, that this is axiomatic. These are axioms of corporate media. The Israeli government says this, Israelis claim this in an email provided by the IDF. According to Israeli sources, you'll never hear them talk about the Hamas sources.
They can't be trusted.
Of course this is more propaganda. And notice the timing. Literally, the ICJ, which is a UN court, just ruled against Israel in the South African case. And simultaneously, we have this investigation in this story about UN workers aiding and abetting Hamas operatives on October 7th. How stupid do they take you for? And somewhere way buried down at the end of the article, we finally arrive at some important information. More than 26,000 people have been killed there and nearly 2 million displaced, according to Gazan and UN officials. Of course, this is according to Gazan and UN officials. We already discredited the UN, so that must be a lie too. Notice the choice words that the New York Times uses to talk about the genocide. More than 26,000 people have been killed. They've just been killed. We haven't said who did the killing. No talk about the crimes of the Israeli state while they are literally being tried for crimes in the world court. Do not trust the New York Times, kids.
Nixon ordered Cambodian genocide. Clinton sent cruise missiles to Sudan, people died. Obama gave the orders to do drone strikes. Reagan invaded Nicaragua in '85.